The situation around the Detroit Lions right now is layered, and it goes well beyond box scores or simple roster chatter. There are multiple storylines unfolding at the same time, and when you connect them carefully, you start to see how much tension, emotion, and long-term planning is sitting underneath the surface of this offseason. One of the most uncomfortable and unusual stories involves an incident between a Lions fan and Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf that has now escalated into a major legal matter. According to the information laid out, the fan involved in the altercation has officially filed a lawsuit seeking $100 million, alleging assault and defamation, specifically claiming he was falsely labeled a racist after the incident. Video footage of the interaction exists, and based strictly on what has been stated, there is no indication of any racial language being used. The claim is that the fan called Metcalf by his name, Metcalf reacted aggressively, and the situation spiraled from there. Whether the lawsuit reaches anything close to that number is another discussion entirely. But the reality is that this is now a legal issue involving a public figure, and that alone makes it significant. For Lions fans, it is a strange reminder that even interactions in the stands can suddenly become national stories, and that players at this level are always under a microscope, whether fair or not. At the same time, there is a completely different emotional tone coming from former Lions safety Quandre Diggs, who recently spoke openly and warmly about Detroit. Diggs made it clear that his experiences with the organization and the fan base left a lasting impact on him. He talked about how every time he comes back to Detroit, he feels love from the crowd, appreciation from the fans, and a genuine connection that has never faded. He went as far as saying Detroit will always have a special place in his heart, and that fans will see him in stands supporting the team once he retires. For longtime Lions supporters, this hits deep. Diggs was a physical, instinctive safety who embodied the kind of football this city respects, and his trade during the Matt Patricia era remains one of the most frustrating moments for many fans. Hearing former players continue to praise the organization reinforces the idea that, despite past mistakes, Detroit has built a culture players genuinely care about. That culture becomes even more interesting when you shift to the coaching and front office side of things. Reports indicate that Ben Johnson, now in Chicago, had strong interest in Drew Petzing as an offensive coordinator candidate. Mike Payton reported there was a legitimate chance Petzing could have landed in Chicago. Instead, the Lions end up with a coach that fits many of the same offensive principles Johnson values: heavy emphasis on the run game, aggressive play-action concepts, and consistent use of tight ends. The irony here is impossible to ignore. Detroit loses coaches every offseason now because of success, yet still manages to land pieces that align with Dan Campbell's vision, and that part matters most. This offense, regardless of coordinator titles, still runs through Campbell's philosophy. That stability is something this franchise lacked for decades. Roster decisions, however, are where things get really serious. A list of potential cut candidates has sparked debate, starting with Taylor Decker. His cap number is significant, but the context matters. Any scenario where Decker is no longer on the roster does not feel like a cold, transactional cut. If he is not here, it likely means retirement and a mutual decision designed to help the team manage the cap. Decker has been loyal, durable for most of his career, and respected in the locker room. The idea of simply discarding him ignores the shoulder injury he played through and the leadership he brings. Graham Glasgow's situation feels different. His cap hit does not align with his current level of play, and age has clearly taken its toll. Whether it is retirement or release, the expectation is that Glasgow will not be on the roster next season. Brock Wright, on the other hand, represents the kind of player fans often overlook. He is not flashy, but he blocks, does the dirty work, and brings value that does not always show up in highlights. Cutting him for minimal savings would not make much sense. Free agency discussions add another layer, especially when talking about the running back position. The idea of replacing David Montgomery has been floated, but the most logical conclusion is also the simplest one. David Montgomery's best replacement is David Montgomery. With an offense expected to run the ball heavily, especially with Jahmyr Gibbs already carrying a major load, removing Montgomery would create more problems than solutions. Depth, balance, and physicality are essential, and Montgomery provides all three. All of these threads together paint a picture of a team at a crossroads, not in terms of direction, but in terms of execution. Legal drama, emotional connections to former players, coaching ripple effects, and difficult roster decisions are all colliding at once. From your perspective as a Lions fan, how do you feel about the way this offseason tension is shaping up? And which of these situations do you think will have the biggest impact on the team moving forward? When you continue pulling on these threads, what really stands out is how intentional the Lions have to be with every single move from here forward, because this roster is no longer in a rebuilding phase where mistakes can be brushed off as growing pains. Every decision now directly affects a Super Bowl window, and that reality changes how you evaluate everything from depth pieces to long-term contracts. The conversation around the offensive line is a perfect example of that pressure. If Taylor Decker eventually steps away, whether through retirement or a quiet, mutually beneficial cap maneuver, the Lions are not just losing a left tackle, they are losing continuity. That means the front office must already be thinking 1 or 2 steps ahead, because regardless of Decker's future, drafting a tackle is no longer optional. You cannot wait until a hole fully opens at one of the most important positions on the field. The same logic applies to center, where the need has been obvious. Interior offensive line stability is the backbone of everything this offense wants to be, especially with a run-heavy identity that is clearly not going away. That identity becomes even more critical when you consider how the Lions want to protect Jared Goff. The offense functions best when Goff is not asked to carry everything on his shoulders. Play action, timing, rhythm, and trust and protection are what allow him to operate at a high level. That is why conversations about free agent centers and interior linemen matter so much. This is not about splash signings or headlines. It is about making sure the engine keeps running smoothly. The Lions have shown repeatedly they value reliability and fit over star power, and that philosophy is consistent with every move being discussed. On the defensive side, the idea of adding a rotational edge rusher makes sense when viewed through the lens of body type and cost. The Lions are not hunting for another headline pass rusher to pair with Aiden Hutchinson. They are looking for someone who can absorb snaps, hold the edge, and contribute without breaking the bank. That tells you a lot about how confident they are in Hutchinson as the focal point of the pass rush. It also shows restraint, something this franchise historically struggled with. Cheap, smart additions that fit the scheme are far more valuable than chasing names that do not align with the locker room or the system. Then there is the emotional side of all this, which cannot be ignored. Hearing former players like Quandre Diggs talk about Detroit the way he does matters. It matters to current players, to future free agents, and to fans who have endured years of instability. When players leave and still speak positively about the organization, it signals that something fundamental has changed. That kind of reputation is built slowly, and it can be damaged quickly if leadership loses focus. Right now, everything points to the Lions being acutely aware of what they have built and how fragile it can be if mismanaged. Even the controversy involving the fan lawsuit, as uncomfortable as it is, reinforces how visible this franchise has become. Detroit is no longer operating in the shadows of the league. Every incident, every quote, every decision now carries weight. That is the price of relevance, and it is something both the organization and the fan base are learning to navigate in real time. When you zoom out, the most important takeaway is that the Lions are not scrambling. They are evaluating, measuring, and choosing carefully. Cuts are not emotional, additions are not impulsive, and philosophy remains consistent across offense, defense, and culture. That does not guarantee success, but it dramatically increases the odds that this team remains competitive year after year instead of flashing briefly and fading away. What complicates this even further is that the Lions are now operating in a space where patience and urgency are fighting each other every single day. On one hand, this front office has earned trust by not panicking, by not forcing moves just to satisfy noise, and by sticking to a long-term vision. On the other hand, the clock is very real. Contracts age quickly in the NFL, cap numbers balloon without mercy, and windows close faster than fans ever expect. That tension is exactly why discussions about players like David Montgomery, Taylor Decker, and even depth contributors matter more now than they would have a few years ago. These are not abstract debates anymore. They are decisions that directly affect how sustainable this roster is beyond just one season. The Montgomery conversation is especially telling because it reveals how the Lions view balance versus efficiency. From a purely spreadsheet perspective, you can always argue about savings, replacements, and draft picks, but football is not played on spreadsheets. This offense is built on imposing its will, wearing defenses down, and staying unpredictable. Asking Jahmyr Gibbs to carry the ball 35 times a game is not just unrealistic, it is irresponsible. Montgomery absorbs punishment, sets tone, and allows Gibbs to be lethal instead of exhausted. Moving on from him would not be a bold innovation, it would be overthinking something that already works. That kind of self-inflicted mistake is exactly what smart teams avoid, and so far, Detroit has avoided it. The same philosophy applies to the tight end room, and players like Brock Wright. He is not a highlight machine, but every offense needs players who embrace unglamorous roles. Blocking tight ends, extend drives, protect quarterbacks, and make explosive plays possible elsewhere. Cutting that kind of player for marginal cap relief sends the wrong message, especially to a locker room built on doing the dirty work. When you listen closely to how this team talks, effort and reliability are currency. That culture does not survive if you constantly sacrifice substance for optics. And this brings everything back to Dan Campbell. No matter how many coordinators come and go, the identity of this team is still rooted in him. The offense reflects his physical mindset, the defense reflects his demand for accountability. Even the way former players speak about Detroit traces back to leadership at the top. That continuity is rare in this league, and it is fragile. One or two poor decisions can crack it. That is why every rumored cut, every potential signing, and every draft pick feels heavier now than it used to. For the first time in a long time, Lions fans are not just hoping for improvement. They are protecting something. They are watching closely because they know what this team can be, and they know how easily it can slip if focus is lost. This offseason is not about splashy headlines. It is about discipline, restraint, and making sure the foundation stays solid while chasing something bigger. Another layer that deserves attention is how quiet confidence has replaced desperation inside this organization. That may sound subtle, but for Lions fans who have lived through decades of reactionary football, it is a massive shift. In the past, when the team got close to relevance, panic usually followed. Big contracts were handed out to the wrong players, depth was ignored, and short-term thinking won out. What you are seeing now is almost the opposite. Even with expectations high, the Lions are resisting the urge to make emotional decisions. That restraint shows up in how they evaluate aging veterans, how they talk about internal development, and how they approach outside additions. Look again at the offensive line discussion through that lens. Moving on from veterans is never easy, especially players who have given years of service and leadership. But the Lions are clearly preparing for transition without forcing it prematurely. That is the difference between planning and reacting. If Decker stays, great. If he retires, the groundwork has already been laid mentally and strategically. The same goes for Graham Glasgow. There is no denial about where he is in his career. There is respect, but also realism. Good teams know when to honor the past without letting it dictate the future. Defensively, the Lions are sending a similar message. They are not chasing fixes. They are reinforcing structure, a rotational edge player, a reliable interior presence, smart depth additions that fit the system, not disrupt it. That tells you the staff believes the core is already strong. When you believe in your core, you supplement instead of overhaul. That belief is rooted in production, not hope. Aiden Hutchinson is not a question mark. The secondary is not being rebuilt from scratch. The defense knows what it is, and that clarity matters. What makes all of this resonate even more is how players past and present speak about Detroit. Quandre Diggs is not an isolated case. There is a pattern forming where former Lions still identify with the organization, still show up, still speak positively. That kind of loyalty does not come from marketing or slogans. It comes from how people are treated inside the building. Free agents notice that, young players notice that, and fans should notice it too because it signals